Thank you. We have the technology at last, I'm pleased to say, and thanks for waiting for that one. Thanks very much for Mark for stepping in. It's actually probably quite a good running order because we've been actually in the digital game for rather longer, and Mark's at the start of the journey. We're 7-8 years into it on a rather smaller scale, I might add. So I'm going to talk you through the pros and cons of screen versus digital printing from our experience for fabrics. I'm conscious a lot of people here are not familiar with the fabric side, so I'll try and skip over some of the sort of industry-specific stuff, and then for 5 minutes at the end I'll take you through wallpaper, which obviously had a lot of talk yesterday about the opportunities. Wallpaper, I'm sure of some of you are already in that market or are thinking of getting in that market, so maybe I'll just give you not a cynical view, but maybe a more measured view or a balanced view. But let me tell you first of all a little bit about Standfast. We're a very traditional English-based printer. We've been trading in 90 years from the same site. Volumes are smaller than they were, but we're still doing about 3 million metres a year. We're at the top end of the market, the higher end of the market. About 2/3 of what we do is home furnishings for curtains and cushions, and we're supplying brands like Designers Guild and Ralph Lauren in the States. The other third is apparel fabrics. Again, top end of the market, we're supplying mainly Liberty of London and starting to get into people like Paul Smith and Barber. So that's our business. You can see we're predominantly a rotary screen printer. We print up to 20 colours. I think as those of you who are in screen printing will realise that involves a lot of screens, thousands of screens, tens of thousands of screens in fact. So we have a very large site to store all these screens. We've also got a flatbed operation. We've got 2 flatbed machines which we do up to 24 colours. Again, an awful lot of screens for that operation as well. And that's been the core of our business right the way through. We're very much a traditional business. We're still tubs of colour. It's a wet process. We're printing with lots of different dye stuffs, but predominantly vat dyes, reactive dyes, dispersed dyes and pigment inks, of course. We've got all the preparation equipment that you might ask for. This is a bleaching range. But we've also got an awful lot of other equipment there for stentering and mercerizing and all the other things that go into printing. I think a lot of people are shocked when they go around to Printworks. They expect to see print machines, and then they actually see 10 times as many other pieces of ancillary equipment around there to get the cloth ready and to finish it off afterwards. We're printing on a variety of different substrates: cotton, linen, wool, velvet and silk, a little bit of polyester, but it's predominantly organic materials. At the heart of our business is service. There's no point us trying to compete with guys in the Far East on cost. We have to compete on service. A lot of that is the front end. We've got a large design studio. We're not putting anything out under our own range, but we are developing ranges for customers and with customers. So we've got a design studio that's doing a lot of CAD separation work to interpret designs for customers and separate it out into the layers, and also work with them on creative coloration. But we do still even have the traditional hand separation skills as well, so that's an important part of our business. In terms of digital, well actually Standfast was a very early adopter before my time. We made an investment in CAD and inkjet printers back in the 1990s, predominantly for sampling, so that we could actually sample digitally for customers before we had to cut screens or put the screens on a machine. We took our first step into continuous inkjet printing in 2006 when we bought 2 stalk sapphire machines, which I think from memory print at about 4 or 5 meters an hour. And we bought the software, including Photoshop, to enable us to run it. And that was predominantly because we were getting customers asking for photographic lengths, or occasionally were asking for special designs that we couldn't achieve with conventional printing, or they really just wanted to test the market for something with a very, very short run. We found by 2008 that actually 4 to 5 meters an hour doesn't give you a great deal of capability, even with 2 of them. And we bought our first stalk Ruby printer, and we bought another 3 after that, over from 2008 to 2011. And I think that's the stalk Ruby. It's got Epsom heads. It's based on a JV5. As you can see, it's still a relatively small machine, but it is doing roughly 20 meters an hour, something in that order. So it's a step up from where we were. And then 18 months ago, we bought our first high-speed Durst Kappa machine, which runs at up to 300 meters an hour. I mean, I think we're typically running it at nearer the 130, 140 meters. And we put it in a dedicated print room facility, because I think one of the other things we learned is that 150-year-old factories, which are what we're in, dirty and dusty and with big temperature variations, don't suit digital print machines. You need a consistent humidity and temperature control. And although it slipped off the bottom of that slide for some reason, in October last year we bought our second Durst print machine. And I think, as you can see, when you see them, they are a much bigger beast. They're a much more industrial looking machine with much bigger heads, much bigger in-feed, out-feed, and clearly you need that to run at those kind of speeds. In terms of our volume growth, I mean, we started off very, very slow. We bought our first machine in 2008. We did less than 6,000 metres. Everybody in the factory thought I was crazy, and, you know, what a nuisance it was trying to get into that market. And I have to say, in the early days, there is a tremendous learning curve, and I think trying to put a new process into a factory that's been running for 90 years, and actually a lot of the staff for 30 or 40 years, really was quite a challenge. But we've persevered with it. We've managed to double or treble our volumes each year since. And in 2013, we did 366,000 metres. This year, we're sort of on track to do 550, 600,000 metres. And at that level, it will be 20% of our volume and a third of our turnover. So it's now decidedly mainstream as far as our business is concerned. So it begs the question, why print digitally? I think some of this you'll have seen before. I think the main reason is that you've just got more creative freedom in design. There are fewer technical restrictions there are for screen, and I'll come on to that in a minute. Secondly, you've got an opportunity to do engineered layouts, which actually is quite useful and quite a big benefit. If you're doing cushions, for example, you can do 2 or 3 across. Every cushion is going to look the same. On apparel, you can do a layout plan. So if you want to do the cuffs and the collars, or you want to do mini skirts, and you can just cut them, design them actually in piece, and you can even put the scissor lines around them if that's what you wish to do. There's also some quite significant technical and quality benefits, but also some issues, I think, and I'll run through those again in a minute. But also there's some economic factors. There's no doubt about it. It's getting cheaper, and it has reached the point where for certain parts of our business, a lot of our customers are moving digitally purely for economic reasons. So let's just talk about the creative benefits. I think the first and most obvious one is scale. If you're printing with a screen, you're limited by the diameter of the screen. It's as simple as that. And you don't have any of those restrictions when you're onto digital. But I think it goes further than that, because you also don't have restrictions in terms of steps. You have the flexibility to change it. Once you've cut the metal, you're locked in on screen printing. With digital printing, now you've got the flexibility to keep changing, and I'll show you some illustrations of that. You've also got the opportunity to add a lot more layers, more colours into the design. If you want a traditional looking product and you're going to do a conventional separation, we're limited with 24 colours on our flatbed machine. We frequently, regularly on digital do 40, 50, 60 colours in the design. But of course, you don't need to layer it. You can use Photoshop to create flat files or semi-layered files. It's a completely different way of originating the design. And one of the beauties of that is that you don't have to build tones up by a whole series of screens. You can do it perfectly graduated. That means you can do watercolour effects. You can build in photographic images. And the other thing that digital is very good at is fine lines. I'm not saying we can actually do better fine lines on digital than we can conventionally, but you can certainly do it a lot more consistently and with a lot less effort and expertise. I'm going to run you just through a few graphic illustrations on the basis that a picture tells 1,000 words. I'll give you a few examples of things that we're doing. This is a panel that sits in our reception. It's a very, very traditional looking design. It's actually 3 metres tall and it's got over 40 colours in it. Similarly, another very traditional design taken from an archive, but again, we've got over 40 colours in that, and it's a very large repeat. Another archive document, this is a 1.4 metre. I've included that really because I think when you zoom in, you can see some of the beautiful detail, the richness of the colours and the tonal work that you can achieve with digital printing using reactive inks, and I'll come on to some of the pros and cons of reactive inks in a minute. This is a more contemporary design. This is actually a piece of hand-painted artwork done by one of the girls in our studio. They've been scanned into a computer. They've been pieced together to make this cushion. And I think the beauty of that is that actually, if you zoom in on that again, there's no reason why you couldn't just boost that up and do a cushion purely of ladybirds or flies or whatever takes your fancy. But what we've also done with this design is we've knocked it down to about 5% of its size and are selling it as a shirting fabric. For those who don't mind having bugs all over the shirts or the dresses, of course. This one really, I think, again, just is there just to show the richness of colour and the tonal work that you can achieve with digital printing. But it doesn't have to be so in your face. You can also go at the other end of the spectrum with something like this, very subtle, lots of antique, distressed looking finish. So it's an incredibly versatile process in that respect. The design here, which really just shown because we're printing it on velvet, it's actually a very, very deep blue, even though it's black. Again, you've got these little fantasy animals with lots of tonal work in. Again, it would be nigh on impossible to reproduce that on a conventional design. This is an apparel design. Again, just an awful lot of detail in there. Again, that's quite a small children's print, that one. And going a little bit more, I suppose, contemporary, this is for Christian Lacroix. It's obviously been put together using Photoshop, lots of semi-photographic images pieced together with that pinboard effect. I mentioned about cushions. This is an example of what you can do doing, on this case, a bolster cushion 2 across. And again, you can see we've put the cut line in there, so every cushion will look the same. And similarly, that when you see that type of cushion, if you're trying to produce that from a conventional fabric, you would have a colossal amount of waste. So I think, to sum up really, on the creative side, there are just so many things. It's such a versatile process, and there are so many things that you can do that you could not do conventionally. There's also some technical benefits. I mean, one of the big issues is that you don't have issues with screen misalignment and fit. It's a major quality problem for any of you doing screen printing will know. And it not only removes that quality problem, but it also means that you've got far fewer design compromises. You're not having to separate your design with overlaps on there and avoiding fine lines in certain parts of your design because, well, there are no overlaps on digital. And I think there's a couple of examples here. I just showed you just what happens. If your screens are out of alignment north and south, you can end up with little white flashes. If you're out of alignment east to west, then you end up like here with the image just looking completely displaced. So those are some of the issues that you can get on conventional printing. The other technical advantage with going for digital is that you get less siding. You don't get problems with edge-to-edge shading simply because your screen isn't quite parallel to the surface of the belt. There are also some issues, though, and the biggest one for me is the fact that you're restricted, or we're restricted at the moment, to achieve the kind of quality level that we want to reactive dyes, and they are certainly inferior light fasteners for home interiors. It's less of an issue for apparel, but it is an issue for home interiors. And I think there's no one really seriously developing VAT dyes at the moment for digital printing. There are some pigment ink systems out there, and there's an awful lot of development work going on. And for lots of applications, pigments are very suitable, but actually there's still a long way to go on development. And I think that's one of the biggest things holding back the industry at the moment from digital. Cloth preparation is also a lot more complex and critical. I mentioned earlier we put an awful lot of work into cloth preparation. We've discovered that we are having to add all sorts of extra processes to make sure we don't have loose fibres, we don't have loose hairs, because you've got no contact between your print head and your cloth. It's a far less forgiving process. You also, to get the reactive ink dyes to work properly, have to put a pre-treatment on. And again, that's a chemical process. We tried 32 different recipes on the Durst machine before we finally got one that actually worked, and that was a frustrating period, a lot of trial and error. Some cloths are simply less suitable than others. I mentioned you've not got contact between your print head and the cloth, and as a consequence of that, what you can end up with is on a slubby cloth, or if you haven't prepared it properly, as you can see, some little white spots appearing on the design. And we also would say that special effects are also something that's not possible. For example, we're printing here for Designers Guild with metallic inks. We use a lot of paste whites on our designs as well. To highlight them again, there are things that you cannot do with digital printing. So in that sense, there's still very much a place for conventional printing. And lastly, and I won't go into any great detail on this, but suffice to say, the biggest factor on downtime on our machines is coloration. It is far more difficult and time-consuming. There is an element of learning curve there, to be frank. We're having to get used to mixing. It's a lot easier with a bucket and a stick, frankly, than it is working with computer programs, but it's also the case that reactive inks, particularly the digital reactive inks, seem to be particularly sensitive to any changes, and you're also having to try and predict what the colour is going to look like when it's been through the steaming operation. So there are some issues, but I think without question the advantages outweigh the disadvantages. And I think in that context, it's perhaps a surprise to you to hear that actually digital printing accounts for around about 2% of the total global print market. It is still very small. And one of the key issues is the economic issues. In a nutshell, the trade-off you've got is between much lower design origination cost on digital, because at the very least you're not cutting screens, and you might be able to use Photoshop rather than sophisticated engraving technology. But you've got higher running costs, and the reason that the running costs are higher, you're buying a machine, you've got to depreciate it, print heads run out, you are spending a lot of time getting the coloration right, particularly on reactive inks. The inks themselves are more expensive, and the machines are a great deal slower. So the running costs are still considerably higher, and as a consequence, digital is definitely cheaper for short runs and high colour work, and screen is cheaper for long runs and simpler designs. And I think, well, what's long and what's short, and it varies depending on the cloth and the design. But as a rough rule of thumb, I would say around about 300 metres is the crossover point when digital suddenly gets cheaper below that number. And a lot of our high-end customers who don't really want to be ordering 300 metres, they want to order at most 200 or maybe 100 metres, it's now their default option. They may actually insist that you make it look like a conventional screen print. They don't want it to look digital. They will just go for it purely on economic grounds. And the gap is closing fast. So I think whereas that threshold used to be 50 or 100 metres, it's now 200, 300 metres. I think it's only a matter of time before the threshold rises. However, there are some trade-offs. Now, I think it was referred to earlier on this morning, and it was referred to several times yesterday, that quality is a given. Well, there's quality and there's quality. And I think whilst I think what customer expectations do vary, we're certainly at the high end of the market. And one of the big trade-offs that we see is that our default option is always to conventionally separate a design if the design is suitable. It takes time, it costs money, but you have control over your colour, far more than you do on a flat file, and you will get a much better looking result. Some designs are simply not suitable, and you need to use Photoshop, you can't layer it. Our default option is colour conventional separation, but I'm afraid there is a perception out there that it is plug and play, that you just bang the image into Photoshop and away you go, and I think our experience has been that it doesn't really work like that. If you are going to Photoshop though, I think one of the things I would flag up is you're going to scan the image in. As much effort as you put into generating the design, if you're feeding it in, you need a good scan, because the difference between good scans and bad scans is quite dramatic. Now, I don't know whether this one's going to come up. I'm not sure it is. Well, we've got the low res, we've got the poor quality scan, or whether the good one's going to come up. We'll skip over that, but I think as you can see on that poor quality scan, you've got a lot of noise in the background, you've got a line through it. You can tidy that up, but you'll never recover the detail. The detail's in the one that's hidden on the right. I think we better not wait for that one. The other trade-off is, one of the beauties of digital print machines, but one of the biggest risks, is that you have an awful lot of machine settings. And you can run a design on low resolution, you can run it on a higher resolution, the number of passes is critical. There is a tremendous temptation to run it on the lowest that you can get away with. You get a lot more output through your machine, and frankly, you spend a lot less money on ink. And so that's when I say quality is not necessarily an absolute. We tend to start on the highest resolution setting and work back to the point at where it becomes noticeable and then nudge it back up. There's an awful lot of people out there starting on the lowest resolution and seeing what they can get away with. I don't think that one's going to come up. We'll skip that one. I think one of the key things, though, I would say, is that it is not easy. It's not a quick fix. I know the previous speaker, Chris, mentioned plug and play. I think our experience is it isn't really plug and play if you are trying to achieve a certain quality level. I think there are a lot of people out there, people like Spoonflower, for example, you can send your images in and doing a fantastic job. It's a different business model for what we're wanting. So I think you need to be quite clear what position you are in the marketplace. Right, last 5 minutes. I did mention that we do digital wallpaper too. I say we, it's a separate company, Anstey Wallpaper Company. It's 200 kilometres down the road, but we've got pretty well an identical customer profile, and I cover the two businesses as well. We're a traditional high-end wallpaper manufacturer. We're producing using gravure, flexo, surface print, and rotary screen. And 18 months ago, we took the decision that we should follow the textile side and go into digitally printed wallpaper. We've built a digitally printed studio within our area. We've bought 2 Mimaki UV machines, and a little bit later on we bought an HP latex machine. And the advantages and the reason we're going digital, some of it has been covered in previous presentations, but the biggest attraction by a country mile is just the creative freedom that you've got. You don't have the restrictions on scale. You can work with multiple colours, you can use photographic images, and you can create some fabulous bespoke feature walls, which is the particular attraction, I think, for commercial applications, restaurants, offices and public spaces. Where we seem to have got another technology breakdown there, have we? Okay. We skip forward a few. We get back to where we were? Okay, so I think apart from the creative freedom, the big attraction is lower cost of entry for a customer. You don't have to go and spend several thousand euros engraving. You don't have to go with the manufacturer's minimum quantities. You can take the lower minimum, much lower minimums. But, okay, I was going to show you a load of images of things that we've produced on digitally. I can't do those, they appear to have disappeared. Okay. No, I think we need to go backwards.
Why not leave it to them, Barry?
Okay.
It seems to work better. That's the limit of my technical knowledge.
Can we recover that, or are we done? No, I think we've skipped a part of the presentation. I think what I was going to say is I'll skip those, but we'll go back and pick up to the top of this page if we can. We appear to be getting some of them. No, we're not. No, we've jumped forward again. Right, let me just, let's take it from here, so forget that. So I think I could have shown you some images that we have produced digitally. We honestly have. In our first year of trading, we've done about €500,000 of business, so I think that was a pretty good start. But it is still very niche. I mean, I think there's no doubt about nobody should be under any illusions. Digital printing is very, very much more expensive than conventional printing. The digital print machines are slow and the ink costs are really, really high compared to the inks that we would use to print conventionally. And as a rough rule of thumb, we look at our unit cost for a 10-metre roll, and we're not at the cheap end of the market. It's typically 4 times to 8 times more expensive to print digitally than it is conventionally. And there are also some technical limitations. You can't use mica or metallic or special effect inks, which is quite a big part of the wallpaper industry. You've got fewer substrate options. And often, one of the reasons I think we often end up printing conventionally is that gravure is a very good creative alternative. And I think these images actually are not digitally printed. You might think they are. Lots of people think they are. These have all been printed using a gravure press. You can't mimic the scale, of course you can't, but you can mimic a lot of that tonal work or using 4-colour process. As you can see, we've got design here, bookcase. We missed a couple along the way, but no matter, time is moving on. But I think in saying that, I'm putting some caveats against wallpaper and maybe presenting a much less positive view of digital printing than say some of the people did yesterday. But I think there's no doubt about it. Print machines will get faster, they will get better and more reliable. Ink systems will get cheaper. I think, to put it into context, on reactive inks, they've come down to a quarter of what they were costing 8 years ago. I hope HP have got a similar plan for the latex, but time will tell. But certainly the ink systems need to get cheaper if this is going to acquire any kind of growth, because the market share at the moment is very, very tiny. It's a fraction of 1% of the total wall coverings market is digital, but it is growing. You know that special effect inks will be developed, and designers are starting to exploit the creative opportunities that digital offers. So the future is digital, but it will take probably a lot longer and not get quite as far as it has on the textile side and in certain other areas. And on that note, I'll just say thank you.